Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Seattle Ravello. I work in our sales and marketing department here at YBC. If you're not familiar with us already, we are a custom design build firm specializing in vehicular and pedestrian bridges. We've been in business for 38 years now, and throughout that time, we've come up with thousands of creative crossing solutions for almost any environment type you can imagine. It really is something that our team is passionate about and that we're very good at. I'm excited because today we're going to be talking about one of our most popular topics, culverts versus bridges, and some considerations you should take before choosing a crossing method. Now, before I introduce our speaker and we get this rolling, I did want to point out some of the features of this presentation that you'll want to keep in mind. Make sure you're watching the chat box because we will have a member of our team posting links to articles and projects that you may want to check out. Also, if you have any questions that come up, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A box and we will review your questions live at the end of the presentation. Well, without further ado, I would like to introduce Titus Edwards, our lead senior bridge consultant who will be presenting today. You guys are in for a real treat to get to hear from Titus. He has been with YBC for 20 years and is most definitely an expert in what we do. So Titus, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Seattle?
I'm great. Thanks.
It's good to be with you. And it's good to have all the people listening to us today as well. We appreciate your time. This is our first webinar for 2022. We've done some in the past. We have more coming up. We hope that you'll be able to join us for some of them coming up later on in the year. Today, we're going to be talking about a culvert versus a bridge, choosing a crossing method. Now, I think the topic itself, Seattle, begs the question, why in the world would anybody consider putting in a timber bridge instead of just throwing in a culvert? Well, that's what we're going to be addressing today. Now, a bridge and a culvert share a common purpose. They both are intended to provide a passageway over an obstruction. You may have a stream or a wetland, and you need to build a road across it or a pathway across it, and yet still allow for the conveyance of water. You could do it with a bridge or you could do it with a culvert. York Bridge is a national timber bridge building company, and we're full design build. Every day we're getting calls and emails from clients, civil engineers from all over the country, and we are asked to evaluate a crossing for a potential timber bridge. And many times we'll open up the drawings that the civil engineer sends us, and looky there. They have already drawn in a culvert for the crossing. And that kind of makes sense because culverts are typically the go-to pitch for an engineer when they have a crossing. I mean, after all, a culvert is typically looked at as the best type of crossing. It's simple, it's easy to install, it's cheap, there's no maintenance. We just throw a culvert in and move right on down the road. You know, in some cases, in many cases, that is true. If you have a small, insignificant crossing, sure, just throw a pipe in there, throw a box culvert in there, fill over it, and continue on. That would be a simple and easy way to go. But if you have a sensitive wetland, a larger stream, sensitive streams, now you may be looking at larger open culverts, arched culverts, bottomless culverts, and things may change. So you may want to consider a timber bridge, especially in those cases. And so today, I want to talk to you about some considerations that you may want to think about before choosing a crossing method, culvert or bridge. Well, the first point I want to make has to do with the environmental impacts. You know, Seattle, everybody today is all about protecting the environment.
Yes, that's so true. We hear it all the time.
And we here at York Bridge are also very much concerned about the environment. Now, I want to address the environmental impacts from two standpoints. First of all, from the production of the material. When you're dealing with culverts, you're talking normally about steel or concrete. And look at the factories where these materials are produced, the tremendous amount of greenhouse gas and carbon emissions, the environmental impact of the production of the material itself is quite massive. But now when you're talking about a timber bridge, you're talking about something that's natural, that's organic, that is very green friendly. The lumber is coming from these managed tree farms. And as we know, trees growing are very good for the environment. These trees are absorbing the carbon dioxide from the air. And so with a wooden bridge, you're using a material that is very green friendly, it's renewable, it's natural, it's organic. It is a very, very small carbon footprint. But the second angle of the environment that I want to suggest to you to consider has to do with the installation of a culvert versus a bridge. Here you see in the picture a typical box culvert or multiple box culverts being installed for a stream crossing. But notice the massive impact of the crossing, where they've had to build cofferdams, they've had to dewater, they've had to put down a gravel base. You see the large equipment that is running through the crossing. It is a tremendous amount of impact to the crossing. But when you're talking about a York timber bridge, you're talking about timber piling supports. It is a very minimal impact to the crossing. So it's therefore much more environmentally friendly to install. What you're seeing is a slide that was done by Eric Lass. And if you can go back to that, Eric Lass is a civil engineer that we work with quite a bit out of Massachusetts. And he does a lot of solar farm projects. And he was asked to evaluate box culverts, arched metal culverts, and timber bridges for these solar farms. And most of these were simple wetland stream, very small crossings. But I want you to look at the very bottom there to the right, his conclusion with the timber bridge: minimal temporary and permanent resources area impact. And that's exactly true. Now, there's another angle here as well. In this time-lapse video that you're going to see next, you can see us actually building a bridge. This is up in Marietta, Georgia. It's for an office complex called Edison Chastain. 2-lane vehicular loaded bridge. It's part of the driveway leading up to the office complex. Now, the bridge is a multiple span design, about 160 feet long. But notice how we're building this. We're working from the deck of the bridge itself. York Bridge is known for its deck level construction method. You can see the stream down there in the crossing, but we're not down there at all. We're working off the deck to drive our piling and to build the bridge. And so it's a very environmentally sensitive and a very environmentally friendly method of installing a bridge. So the next time you think about putting a culvert in versus a timber bridge, you may want to think about it from an environmental standpoint.
You know, Titus, looking at that last image and then this video, you don't have to be an environmental scientist to see why a bridge could be a better choice. I mean, the amount of impact to the land and the ecosystem in that photo, putting the culvert in, it's shocking. And I love watching this video because I think it really showcases the consideration of the environment that's taken in during the construction process.
You know, that is such a great point. And again, from an environmentally friendly standpoint, a timber bridge is going to be a good solution. Well, I want to suggest you another consideration: timber bridge versus culvert. Think about it from a permitting standpoint. Typically, trying to obtain a permit for a culvert is a very difficult, long-term, and expensive proposition. There's a lot involved in getting a permit, whereas getting a permit for a timber bridge typically is much quicker, easier to obtain. And the reason is what we just talked about a moment ago. It's the impact. The environmental impact is so much more massive with a culvert as compared to the timber bridge, where you're just driving those timber piling into the ground. Here again is this slide by Eric Lass doing the comparison, but look there at the bottom, his conclusion. He uses the term simplified permitting with the timber bridge. And that's the way it'll work in many, many cases. As a matter of fact, Seattle, I understand that the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't even consider driven timber piling from the deck of a bridge as impact to a crossing. Therefore, they will allow typically bridges to be built under their nationwide permits, which makes it much easier to permit. And today, with the way the permitting goes, it can become an important issue. The next picture you're going to see is a bridge we built a few years ago in Alpharetta, Georgia, called Inspired Living. Inspired Living is an assisted living facility that was built up on a hill. And this is the road that comes into the facility. You're seeing it from an aerial view. All of the orange you're seeing was a floodplain and an impact that would have been caused by the installation of multiple culverts. When I first got the drawings from the engineer, they'd already drawn in multiple culverts for this particular crossing, but it was going to raise the flood elevation 13 feet. They would never have been allowed to permit and to build a bridge in that fashion. We were able to build a timber bridge there, and we're going to show you a little bit more about this bridge coming up a little bit later on. Another bridge that we built is up in Delaware. This is our Breakwater Beach Bridge. Interesting bridge. By the way, Seattle, have you ever been to Delaware?
I have not, but it sure does look beautiful.
A beautiful residential subdivision. Interesting backstory. Developer bought this land in the 70s and 80s and developed this subdivision. This is in Sussex County, Delaware, along the ocean. We have a lot of bridges in the county. But there was one section of wetland that the Army Corps of Engineers would never allow them to develop and build on. And they tried many different ways to get the bridge built. They even brought in Seattle, a structural engineer, and he designed a metal bridge that had openings like a metal grate, you know, like water flows down into, and he was going to try to use that for the deck. Well, finally, they brought in a wetland consultant named Jim McCulley, and he knew of us. And he suggested to the Army Corps, York Bridge, deck level construction methodology, no impact to the wetland, build the bridge. And after 30 years, Capano management tried to get this section approved and permitted to build on. 30 years. They finally got a permit, and we were able to build this very unique and special timber bridge for this wetland crossing. And you can see the driveways where they were going to be building houses up on pilings as well.
I love this project so much because, you know, it really is so shocking that it took so long to be able to come to a solution with the permitting. And I love that we were able to provide that. And when you look at this video, I mean, you can just tell that the bridge fits the development like a glove. So I think it's a win-win in that way. And I love this one.
Beautiful design. It worked out very well from the environment and was able to be permitted by the developer. So think about permitting. It may be the timber bridge will help you out there. Well, a third consideration when you're thinking of culvert versus timber bridge, think about the design. Now, by design, what I mean here, the spanning solution for the crossing. We have a lot of different spanning solutions that we utilize. We're actually going to have another webinar dealing with that. And there's a lot that goes into it. The flow of the water, the flood elevations, what is allowable, soil conditions. There's many things that go into this. But what a bridge will enable you to do is to open up a crossing, allowing for greater flow of the water instead of impeding it many times, which a culvert can do. Here again, Eric Lass, the civil engineer, making the comparisons. And then you'll see there at the bottom, his conclusion again, that the timber bridge being very customizable was the best design solution for those particular crossings. You know, many times we see pictures Seattle clients send us of culverts, and they've already had problems with them. The picture on the right that you're seeing now, here's some culverts. You can see where they've been smashed down. They've collected debris. They've gotten clogged up. There's been erosion. They've had nothing but problems. And we ended up all that being torn out, and we built a beautiful timber bridge there. The one on the left, though, is interesting because this is fairly recent. We do a lot of work with Toll Brothers, and they have a project up in Pennsylvania where this picture is taken from. By the way, Seattle, have you ever been to Pennsylvania?
Of course, I'm a Penn Stater for life.
Well, no wonder you're so good if you're a Penn State graduate. And we are glad you're here with us too. This is a residential subdivision. They built it out, and they had this trail that went around it. And notice what they did. They got permission to just throw in a couple of pipes through this wetland area and little stream, and then they just put an asphalt trail over it. Seattle, this wasn't in more than 2 or 3 weeks before they had some rain and they had a little bit of flooding. And look what happened. It blocked up, flooded, eroded, and damaged all of this. Well, they tore it all out. We ended up building a couple of timber bridges for them, and it opened up the flow, and it worked much, much better for the spanning solution for the crossing. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about consider the design, consider the spanning solution, and a bridge will open up that crossing so much more for you, where many times a culvert can become an obstruction in and of itself, creating flooding, leading to erosion. We've talked about the inspired living bridge, and here it is again. You're seeing now from underneath, and you can barely see it, but there to the left, there is a small stream that we were crossing over. And this is the stream that was causing all of the potential flooding problems. We ended up with a 3-span design, had 2 piling bents in the crossing. We spanned over the stream, and then we also spanned over a sewer easement there to the right. It worked out very, very well. We were able to put these spans in, but yet we were not impeding the flow of the water. Whenever it rains and floods, the water can still flow through without creating any impacts, without creating any problems, as the culvert design originally would have done so. So when you're considering a bridge or culvert, think about the span and the flow of the water and how a timber bridge will help with that. Well, number 4, I want to talk about cost. I think Seattle, a lot of people may be surprised I'm bringing this up.
Of course, this is what everyone's here for, right?
Exactly. That's typically the first question we get. How much does a timber bridge cost? Now, I'm not going to tell you guys today, oh yeah, a timber bridge is always going to be cheaper to build than a culvert. No, I'm not going to tell you that. That's not true. If it's a simple, easy box culvert or pipe, yes, they're going to be a lot less expensive than any type of a bridge system. But there are times when one of our timber bridges may be able to save you some cost. Again, Eric last his slide comparing the culverts and the bridge, and he is the one that came up with the cost analysis, and he determined that the timber bridge was actually less expensive than the other 2 options. You know, Seattle, what's interesting, people will call me up and they'll say, hey, Titus, I got a price for a culvert. It's $60,000. And I say, well, the bridge is going to be about 200. Oh, well, that's so much more. But what they're thinking of is only the material, not the full installation. But when we're talking bridge, we're talking full design build. It's everything out the door, pretty much turnkey, not just the cost of the culvert itself, because the culvert has to be installed. And that's typically where most of the costs are going to be found. We've talked about there is, by the way, the cost comparison slide. And you see in this case, this is just a little vehicular bridge for solar farm. The timber bridge turned out to be less than the installation of the aluminum arch. We've talked about this inspired living bridge, and I want to go back to it again. Here are some of the original drawings, and you see the multiple culverts that they were originally looking at for the crossing. But what was interesting, a site contractor did price installing those culverts the engineer originally designed. The cost, $900,000. We built that bridge you saw earlier, 2-lane vehicular bridge, turnkey out the door, for $700,000. And so we were able to save the developer a couple of $100,000. So here's a perfect example where the timber bridge and the design that we utilized was able to be cost effective for the developer. I think our next slide shows the bridge. Here is that same bridge from a different angle. You see what a beautiful bridge it is. The design worked. It worked from permitting standpoint. It became the best solution and even saved them money as well. The next picture, you're going to see our Coconut Point bridges. This is a mall project, shopping center down in Estero, Florida. This is Fort Myers area, right off of Highway 41. We built 2 vehicular bridges, and this is interior within the shopping center to access the internal roads and the parking areas. This is a 100-foot bridge in the foreground. The other bridge is a 300-foot long vehicular bridge. Now, what's interesting, the engineers originally designed multiple con spans, bottomless concrete arches, for the crossings. Estimated cost, they had to de-water, by the way, to install. Estimated cost to install, $4.5 million. We completed both of these bridges back in 2000, when was that? 2004, 2005, to less than $2 million. Now, this is a Simon Property Mall, and we saved Simon Property $2 million by building the bridges instead of the culverts. By the way, Seattle, have you ever been to a mall?
Just a few times, right?
Well, if you ever go down to this area, you'll need to go to this mall. It's a beautiful, beautiful mall. So here again, I'm not trying to say timber bridges are always less expensive. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes they're going to be more expensive. Depends upon the crossing, but there are times it might be less expensive. It's certainly worth a call or contacting us so that we can at least take a look and give you some ideas and solutions from that standpoint. And that brings me to the last point I want to make. When you're considering a culvert versus a timber bridge, you might want to think about the aesthetics. It's interesting that with a culvert, they're really best not seen. They're very plain, sometimes downright ugly. And sometimes we've even seen where they'll try to dress them up by putting stone facing or brick facing and columns to make them look prettier. But you know, Seattle, with a timber bridge, the aesthetics come with the material itself. A timber bridge is beautiful. And it's interesting, the Coconut Point bridges that I mentioned to you, when they opened up the mall, I went up to Indianapolis and did a presentation for Simon Property where their headquarters are. And they told me thousands of people were coming in to see this new shopping center, and they were all talking about the timber bridges. The aesthetics. People love timber bridges. There's a natural warmth and a charm that comes from these timber bridges. And you can see with York Bridge, these are elite, gorgeous, iconic, legacy design timber bridges. That's what we do here at York Bridge, everything being custom designed. So you may want to think about the aesthetics, especially if the bridge is in a very high profile area where a lot of people are going to see it. You just can't beat the aesthetics of a timber bridge. The video you're going to see here playing next, well, actually, we're going to see the drawings first. This is our Esplanade Lake Club project. I received some drawings from Waldrop Engineering, and this is what I saw when I opened it up. You see in the profile view at the bottom, they drew in a conspan, a culvert for the crossing. You can see it on the top in plan view. There are a couple of lakes, and they wanted to keep the lakes open to allow boat passage, but they had to build the entrance road into this residential subdivision, had to cross over it. This is a Taylor Morris subdivision down in Fort Myers, Florida. So we came up with a very good design, and this is the timber bridge that we ended up building. It's a 3-span design. Notice the center is open with a free span section to allow the boat traffic and a couple of short approach spans. And then we have all of our protective finishes on the wood. And look at the handrail on the outside. We work with Waldrop engineering's landscape architects and came up with a beautiful, special looking design. And all of this and the colors were to match the California theme for the overall development. And this is the entrance road coming in that people drive over every day. Very high profile. They wanted the aesthetics. The design worked. Actually, it worked within their budget from a cost perspective. And then look at what they got. What a beautiful amenity feature that was able to solve their crossing problem. These timber bridges, Seattle, are just beautiful, are they not?
They are truly, they're gorgeous.
Well, the next time you're considering maybe just throwing a culvert in, you might want to give us a call, contact us. We'll be glad to talk to you and see what we can do for a timber bridge option. And I like to say, Seattle, with a timber bridge, you get 3 bangs for your buck. Number 1, you solve your crossing problem. Number 2, you did so in a very environmentally responsible way. And third, when it's all said and done, you have something to show for the money that you spent. A beautiful legacy York timber bridge.
Yes, that is so true. Thank you so much, Titus, for such an insightful presentation. I would love to start to review some of the audience's questions, but before I do that, I did want to point out a couple of resources in case you are interested in learning more. So if you go to the site listed on the slide here, you will find an article with some of the contents from this webinar, as well as a full case study on the Inspired Living project that we discussed today. So if you have a colleague or a friend who you think could benefit from today's message, maybe send them one of the links or hold on to it for your own future reference. Also, check out all of our upcoming webinars for this year at ybc.com/webinars. Our next webinar is going to be led by our design manager, and we will be diving into more detail on what it's like to design with YBC. Also, if you have any questions or if you would like to request a certificate of completion for today's presentation, feel free to email me at seattleyork@ybc.com. All right, so let's see our questions. So Titus, Gary is asking if our bridges are able to be constructed within public rights of way if they are DOT approved.
The majority of our bridges are in private settings. It is possible, and we do have some that have been accepted by DOTs across the country. You have to kind of look at them on an individual basis. It's interesting, Seattle. I was just up in Charlotte last week on a trip and met with a developer that does have a project and has a public road coming into a subdivision, but they were able to work a deal with the county. They want to put in a timber bridge, and that section of road where the timber bridge is, they're going to keep private and put into the HOA for maintenance, though the road coming in will be public. We have some bridges that have gone over to cities or counties across the country. So it's more on a case-by-case basis. And typically we found it's about a 50-50 proposition. Typically, you're not going to build a timber bridge on a state highway or something along that line. So in a public setting and a public highway, more than likely not. But sometimes in other settings, certainly it will work very well.
Thank you, Titus. We also have Guillermo as well as Trey wondering about the maximum span that can be achieved with our bridges as well as the height.
Okay. Well, if you're talking single free span, we can single free span up to about 100 feet. Using glue laminated beams, we can span about that far. But if we're able to use other supports, then there is no length. We can just keep on adding supports and make it as long as it needs to be. The same thing is true pretty much on the height. If it's a single free span, we built bridges that are over 40 feet high over the top of retaining walls, but they were single free spans. If there are piling supports, then you're limited probably in the range of about 30, maybe 35 foot with height from our driving piling standpoint.
Thank you, Titus. It looks like we also have a couple questions about service life as well as maintenance, if you want to speak to that a little bit.
You know, it's interesting. Maintenance is always the question that comes up with a timber bridge. I've often wondered, do they ask the same questions about steel and concrete? All bridges have maintenance. We actually have a webinar coming up later on where we're going to talk about maintaining a timber bridge and all of that. And over time, it's about the same, whether it's a concrete or steel bridge from a cost perspective. All bridges have maintenance. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of the question, Seattle?
Also asking about the lifespan expectancy.
Our bridges carry our vehicular bridges carry a 75-year design life. So these bridges are meant to last for a long, long time.
Okay, thank you. And then it looks like we have one more question from Chuck. He's asking about what test level our timber vehicular barriers are rated to. He says MASH or NCHRP.
He sounds like he's talking about either Massachusetts or North Carolina DOT. Again, most of these are not built in public right-of-ways where the DOT is involved, but we have designed and built anywhere from a T1 up to about a T4. I think if I remember right, the guardrail systems go from about TL1 up to about a 6 or 7. But most of these are in residential use, slow speed, low usage, where the TL1 equivalents that we design and build can be used. We have built TL2 equivalents and up to TL4s.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like those are all the questions that we have for now. I'll give it another few seconds here to see if we get any more. And Adrian, if you are still here, I did see your comment. We are Penn State. Let's go Penn State. Love to see that. Well, it looks like those are all the questions for today. So
hey, does he know that we have built a couple of bridges at Penn State?
Yeah, you know what? We did. We built one up there. What was that, 2 years ago now?
Yeah, was it called Helix? I think it was at the Helix building, maybe.
Yes,
a little pedestrian bridge.
Mm-hmm. It was one of the new housing developments right outside of State College.
Ah, very good. Very good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And if you happen to think of any questions later on that you didn't get a chance to ask, remember, you can always email me and I'll be glad to answer that for you. But we hope everyone has a great rest of their day. And again, thanks so much for being here.